is psychotherapy which not only recognizes man's spirit, but actually starts from it, may be termed logotherapy. In this connection, logos is intended to signify the spiritual, and beyond that, the meaning, says Viktor Frankl in The Doctor and the Soul. Dear colleagues, students of logotherapy, I would like to begin my presentation by stating that in my opinion and experience, existential analysis is a prerequisite for a logotherapy, if not for any psychotherapy. As we all know, the terminology existential analysis was coined by Viktor Frankl in the late 20s, early 30s, as confirmed by Paul Pollack in his article Viktor Frankl's Existenzanalyse in ihrer Bedeutung für Anthropologie und Psychotherapie. It dates from 49, and I do have a translation available. Existential analysis is a phenomenological and person-oriented prerequisite for psychotherapy, looking for what is essential in the life of the person. The purpose of it is to facilitate the identification with authentic, personal, and meaningful decisions of the patients or clients about their lives and relationships with other people. In my presentation, you will find an offer to honor this point. Parallel to this, my offer also aims to facilitate the awareness about our own attitude as therapists, helping professionals, teachers, leaders, parents, etc. My presentation offers a possibly critical instrument which might serve for training and personal growth in our training programs. I think that is important. As logotherapists, we know that we operate in a different dimension of human being than psychology does. We start from the authentic spiritual dimension of our clients, an issue DSM has no notion for, because spiritual is not a straightforward psychometrical issue. There is assessment of the degree of meaningful life, which measures individual fulfillment, but there is no psychometric instrument measuring the spirit, which is the unconditional human in his or her decision to exist. A psychotherapy which not only recognizes man's spirit, but actually starts from it, may be termed logotherapy. In this connection, logos is intended to signify the spiritual, and beyond that, the meaning, says Viktor Frankl. And that's what we are going to focus on. What is meant by the basic, authentic identity? My basic identity as a person is not the problem that I have, but it is my self-existing whole and complete, unconditional, unique, and novel. Unconditional means what it says. It is without conditions like present health, color, walk of life, presented problem, the whole row of neurotic symptoms, etc. Neurotic symptoms are recognizable as the yes, but I am just like this. Why don't you leave me how I am? In other words, unconditional is likely to be the noetic, the fundamental personal attitude towards life. Frankl called this the pre-reflected ontological self-efficacy. As a therapist engaged in a Socratic dialogue with the client, I need to look through and beyond the presented, searching for the treasure of personhood. This treasure contains what is called the self-transcending and the self-distancing capacities. It is our shared, fundamental healing energy, the one that lifts us above the problem and lets us develop beyond. Although the human spirit is ubiquitous, each human being, without any exception, lives because of the existence of the unconditional spiritual person. This led me to look for possibility to address the spiritual person first, before addressing any presented problem as a therapist. Besides the problem, both my client and I, we are spiritual persons. The only way to truly understand the other is to be with the other, with the unconditional, authentic person who once said, "Yes, I do" to life. You may remember that Frankl says being with the other is a characteristic of the noetic. Each of our clients have this decision, "Yes, I do" to life, in their autobiographic luggage. If not, the individual would not have survived time and situation, not even in a welfare state. Unconditional means, first and for all, existing without conditions like biology, hereditary, socialization, pathology, judgments, feelings, and gender. Secondly, unconditional points at the beyond and above any neurotic yes but. This yes but is limiting the development and growth towards who one could be and therefore ought to, and in the end must be. The famous Carl Rogers, heavily drawing on Frankl, used to speak about unconditional empathy and congruency as necessary preconditions for a truly healing relationship. A true, concise and clear image of the reality of suffering contains, as Spinoza once so eloquently said, the answer to the for whom, or what, and thus the beginning of the end of the suffering. Logotherapists unconditionally respect the other as a person. However, using Frankl's critical theory of anthropology, known under der leidende Mensch metaklinische Vorlesungen from 1946, we will remain realistic in terms of individual expressions and efforts to discard situational responsibility. Some of you may have studied this in German, others in the preliminary English version I once prepared for my non-Dutch students. We need an existentially true statement, the one our clients carry within themselves, as Paul Pollack once quoted Cicero when he described the importance of Frankl's work for psychotherapy in 1946. We want to discover who our client is after we have listened to the psychological and emotionally charged presentation of his or her current problem. For the purpose of finding the existentially true statement, we will look at the autobiography of the client first. Nothing from the past is lost, although my client may not be aware of it. And the problem is that many of our logotherapy colleagues state to the clients that the past is not important. The past is very important with Frankl. We are not searching for or adding conflicts which may not have been contributing to the present problem. What I need to know as a therapist is the authentic confirmation of personal presence, because, as it will show in the exercise, this confirmation is the unconsciously functioning integrated compass in a person's life. I coined this compass under the basic ID, referring to the authentic, deciding, and therefore existing spiritual person. The person whose true and essential energy is unconditional. We may compare this with the physics of light, being a wave and a particle at the same time. But as such, it is unconditional, shining upon the unjust and the righteous at the same time, enabling us, our decisions in view of individual and shared future. Our bodies and psyches are limited and transient. Our personhood is not. Our personhood is what the beginning of any therapeutic help is. Finding the authentic identity is a prerequisite for all therapies. It sounds like kicking in an open door. Sad enough, it is most of the time not the case. Most of the time, we take it for granted that the person exists beyond and above the problem he or she is grappling with or suffering from. Time limits, cost, protocols, sometimes even fear or dislikes, you name it, they all occur. But existential analysis is a prerequisite for any therapy, even in medicine. It is like looking for Ariadne's thread in the maze of individual problems. Retrieving an original explanation of personal existence, representing a deposit of the unconditional yes, I do to life, despite everything. That is what both the therapist and the client need to begin the process of change for meaning and dignity. Summing up, relating our findings to Frankl's work, we have dealt with the following issues. To stay on track, we simply need to recall that meaning is always there to be found, and that we have inalienable within ourselves everything we need to find it. Omnia mea mecum poto. All I have, I already carry within me. That's a word from Cicero, used by Frankl's closest ally in early logotherapy, Dr. Paul Pollack. Looking for the basic idea is detecting the tension between what is and between who I originally used to be, which leads to what needs to be done in relation to who I ought to become, enabling change. Frankl's motto, amo ergo sum, despite the present given situation. To love is a decision to an intent. If we live our love, we can live our lives and even let it go for the sake of the other. In love, we never hesitate to serve the other, but we cannot serve the other in terms of love when we do not respect and regard ourselves. In respect to the presented problem of our client, this is, as you know, an essential point in existing. Frankl taught us that besides the stubs of the harvested field, there must be a shed where the harvest is kept. If I remember it correctly, it was in Man's Search for Meaning that he wrote the line. Another quote from this world-famous introduction to logotherapy reads, "In the past, nothing is irretrievably lost, but rather, on the contrary, everything is irrevocably stored and treasured." The original, authentic expression of the spiritual person, the one who is whole, unique, sane, is, so to speak, in the sanctity of the unconscious, backstage, and treasured. We can find this expression, the possibly original aware of, yes, I do in the past. It is somewhere between all the memories we have. When we experience problems or pains, we tend to look back for the cause. And that is what we were taught by both psychotherapy and popular literature, that we need to find the traumatic issue, the conflicts that drove us stressfully into the wrong direction, into the wrong behavior, into this illness we don't want, or with this fate we can't stand. In terms of an existential analytical approach, this is not the right way to address the issue of the past. We, as existential analytically trained professionals, we go to someone's past, but we will search for the affirmative, the wholeheartedly expressed reason to live for. The direction of life is forward, to the future, which is the time, a place, a condition in the unknown territory of life, a life in which I am expected already, and a life for which I have to decide. After having presented the problem and spent often necessary time to grieve over the situation of the hurt or blocked ego, I ask my client to engage in an exercise. The exercise is a method of getting to know my client in a different way. The problem has occurred in living there were other times, other occasions too. What we need as therapists is a realistic insight, so both sides are needed. And Frankl's work is offering a realistic therapy, a therapy free from myth, to the point of the active solution of a problem assistance by lifting the cause of the problem. The solution is in the future, where no one has ever lived or caused problems yet. For my purpose of finding the basic ID, I used the model of Frankl's arguments for a tragic optimism, because he likes to work in triads, honoring the definition of what it means to be a human person. The human, says Frankl, is the one who decides who he or she will be in the next moment, or the alias aliter sed non aliud of real life, the I am who I will be of any human being. I can be in numerous different ways without ever losing my future self. I may change my past self in the present, but I cannot lose my future self. The one I have been in the past is not the one I am in the here and now. Look, I grew up. The size of my shoes delivers the basic proof of it. I cannot exclude myself from being integrated, inseparably involved in reality. Now, returning to the issue of the arguments of a tragic optimism, we find 7 of them. Some of you may remember what 7 stands for. Completion as well as liberation towards the freedom to decide for something or someone beyond and above. In the basic ID exercise, I apply the 7 issues as they appear in everybody's life. Someone's life is always already expressing personal existence or self. Our greatest wish used to be the allowance to do it myself, reaching for the mastery of our own lives, and then conjugating ourselves with the challenge of the situation, like building a box or building whatever we like to do, or repairing our bikes. We dreamt about our future. We yearned to reach the age for our driver's license. That's how humans grow up and develop, unconditionally embracing life, eager to take responsibility. The lecture Frankl gave in 1983 is called Arguments for a Tragic Optimism. Please note that Frankl says a tragic optimism, not the tragic optimism, and the arguments for such an optimism is not offering recipes for the solution. My authentic being includes both sides of existence. The polarity between my individual, personal yes I do towards life, as well as the other's pole, having to live in a real life, in a sometimes harsh and unjust or even cruel reality. The yes I do contains what someone is prepared to share or sacrifice for the sake of the other, or the possibly humane future one hopes for, despite everybody and everything as it is transient and difficult. What or who one believes on the road towards realizing and completing what life itself has required us to do. All of these arguments are contained in the so-called basic ID exercise, as I will show. The methodology behind the exercise for finding the basic ID is a nominal Socratic dialogue. which is the individual answer to the question to come up with 6 nouns as they appear in our minds when we think of issues we cannot have. Listening to what our clients tell us is language. What really matters comes in nouns. Experiences are qualified by the use of adjectives and adverbs, whereas actions are defined by using verbs. Our authentic self, our basic idea, is expressed in a kind of a one-liner beginning with I, as the author of the story. Nouns do represent values. Values are the building blocks of our existence in reality. Since the one-liner consists of the personal I and 6 nouns which are containers for feelings, experience, and actions, confirming the validity of this I, we as therapists do have the opportunity to ask questions that get to the core without losing the healing energy. Each of the spiritual personal values is a building block for the recovery of the individual's meaningful and dignifying future. Someone's life is always an effort of expressing personal existence or self. Our greatest wish used to be to get the allowance to do it yourself, to kind of conjugate ourself, which is to communicate yourself with the challenges of the situation, to share oneself. I want to repair my bike. I want to do it myself. I can climb this tree. We dreamt about our future. We yearned to reach the age for our driving license. That's how humans grow up and develop, unconditionally embracing life, eager to take responsibility and joyfully responding to any challenge, even the stupid ones. Listening to what our clients tell us in terms of language is a vehicle. What really matters comes in nouns. Experience are qualified by the use of adjectives and adverbs, whereas actions are defined by the use of verbs. Existential analysis helps people to rediscover their spiritual immunity, thus enabling the recovery of psychological, social, and biological versatility. The psychoneuroendocrine, our vehicle and range, may be or become damaged, impaired, and it will die in the end of our time on earth. But mind, no third party can ever touch our spiritual personhood, be it when true love comes up. No third party is able to destroy our personhood, but only we ourselves can. We are aware of and probably familiar with numerous phases of suffering and evil, as we are also aware of and hopefully familiar with the numerous modalities of true unconditional love. Frankl underlines that being human, which is alive in this world and time, is being able to change, being free for meaning in terms of adding goodness, kindness, compassion out of love, which does not exclude being sober about reality. Let us now look at the pragmatics of what we found relating to Frankl's work. I would like to go through it step by step. It will give you the opportunity to follow the exercise as if you were the client. The purpose of the so-called authentic basic ID is to remobilize and advance the personal spiritual attitude towards life, captured within a realistic statement. In other words, the unconditional yes, I do towards life. That's what we aim at. We'll be looking at the template of the exercise as well as at one example of it. The first thing to remember is, and it is very important to remember it, It is not a psychological test. So it's not an IQ test or something like that. This should be also mentioned to the client. It's just an exercise. After having listened to the expose of the client, I suggest that this client engages in an exercise that will help both of us to find a true starting point for the relationship we are about to begin. We want this relationship to be authentic and successful, and we aim to find the authentic person of the client. For that purpose, I prefer to relate to the person who lives besides the problems. This is, as you will immediately recognize, promoting two typical logotherapy issues: to get to know the person who lives beside the problem relates to self-distancing, as well as to his or her self-transcendent capacities. The spiritual activity will be induced by ways of seduction. I like that. Agreeing to participate in an exercise that will help us to relate as well as possible seduces the client to step aside just for a moment and beyond the psychodynamic forces he or she suffers from. As you can see, I offer a clean sheet of paper, a lead pencil, and an eraser. These are the essential items for the exercise. The result of it will be a correctable sketch, because our lives are and remain provisional until completion. And I explain the client what he or she is expected to do. And I say, I would like you to relax for a moment, taking a deep breath and write down 6 nouns. But before you begin, we need to be more precise. We need 6 nouns, 6 words that appear to be important to you. Please note that these nouns may not contain anything that you normally can have. There is only one in the beginning, and the other words will follow by themselves. But there are no possessions, no things that you can have, not even my wife, my kids, my house, my boat, my job, or things like that. The words that you are looking for will just pop up in your mind, most of the time, one at a time. The first word relates to something that you hold very dear or important, but you cannot possess it or own it. Do you understand what we are looking for? I take the time to explain this, but I do not lift the secret of the exercise. I never do. I want the agreement of the client, confirming that the explanation was understood and the willingness to do the exercise is available. As a logotherapist, we will see what I intend to reach here. By putting a question for a meaningful issue, I do represent life in its real appearance. It is life asking the questions. It is the human person who needs to decide and to answer. To begin with the exercise, I ask the client again to take a deep breath. And as you can see in the slide, this is what it will look like when the 6 items are on paper. We now have the 6 items on paper. And the next step is to decide about a hierarchy between the items. So I ask my client the following. I would like you to decide which 3 out of the 6 items are important. Please mark these 3 with an X. One of these 3 items is the most important one. Please add 1 X to it. So the most important issue has 2 X's. The 3 unmarked items left are also important, but one of these unmarked items is the most problematic for you. So please put a minus with it. And then I ask my client to put on paper 2 triangles, one pointing upwards and one pointing downwards, like you see in the picture. I asked my client to place the items with an X mark in the upwards pointing triangle, especially the one with the two X's in the top corner of the upward pointing triangle. And then I asked my client to put the minus mark in the top of the downward pointing triangle. Two items still need to be placed. They appear on the left and right corner from the bases of the downward pointing triangle. As the client may see, these triangles can be integrated into a star. So I asked my client to integrate them and draw a star and put the first name in the middle of the star. In NLP, this is called leading. Imagine what happens to you when your first name appears in a star. Right, somehow you become a star. That is, in terms of logotherapy, a moment again for transcending the hurt ego. The star on the paper is a light and a mirror at the same time. Combining the triangles happens when the client starts filling in the items from the two stars. Beginning with the upward pointing triangle in the star, where the items XX, X left, X right are inserted. What I do not speak of is what the optimistic triangle in Frankl's lecture stands for. This information is only for the analyst, not for the client, who in a later stage may learn to recognize it as a format for being alive and having to decide. Love, as the most valuable and important attitudinal value, according to Frankl's own motto, amo ergo sum, represents the double X. That's why it's on top. Hope, at the right side of the basis of the upwards pointing triangle, is what the client puts in with an X. Faith, at the left side of the basis of the upward pointing triangle, is where the client puts the last X item. Love feeds hope, connects to faith, faith feeds love. That's where you see how the dynamic starts. Here we as analysts see that the dynamic of a personal existence turns from the top valuer and always goes clockwise. So from love to hope, to faith, to love. But we do not mention this to our client. We keep silent about it. Most of the errors are that we lift the secret too soon. So we have the downward pointing triangle, like in the slide. At the lowest point of the downward pointing triangle, the client puts the minus from his list. What you see is the three positives are already there, and now one minus is appearing at the downwards pointing end of the star. In Frankl's lecture about the arguments for tragic optimism, the minus marked noun stands for death, transience, or in most cases, I would say reality. Life is always like things happening which you did not plan. It is what we call reality. Most of the day-to-day situations are like that. They interfere with almost each and every plan we ever made. We cannot have life our way, can we? Back to the star. We now have to place the still unmarked nouns from the list into the star. Still empty places are open. In the original lecture about the arguments for a tragic optimism, they stand for suffering and guilt. I know that Frankl means guilt as the point of failures, wrong decisions, or even being silenced, watching injustice happening, and suffering at the point of loss. But guilt does not always have to be a liability, a moral failure. It may also mean that we arrived at the next question of life, the one we accept responsibility for. It is the moment of meaning, despite the fact that our lives are and remain incomplete as long as we live. Please remind this. Where suffering is meaning. Without meaning, there would be no suffering. So it could also be a sacrifice that you are prepared to make. For instance, parents take themselves back for the sake of their children. That's what we do because we love someone. We may offer part of our lives as a sacrifice for the sake of the other. We may contribute no matter what. The issue of suffering refers to any kind of suffering, even to the kind we choose to endure. For instance, parents take themselves back for the sake of their child. That's what we do because we love someone. A spouse takes care of the other because of love. We may offer part of our lives as a sacrifice for the sake of the other. We may contribute no matter what. That is also why the issue representing suffering in the star appears right away after the top value of love. So that's an important position in the star. It's where meaning appears. The dynamic circle of the completed star sounds like this. Love, suffering or my offer, hope, transience, faith or confidence, what we owe life is guilt, incompleteness, or the provisional answer we gave. The dynamic star is always clockwise. In other words, because I love, I offer X, hoping that my offer is strong enough to withstand reality. And out of my experience, faith is getting stronger, confidence is getting stronger. Exercise makes confidence in order to enable me facing the questions of meaning, taking the next step, which is what I owe life, fulfilling love. I owe life the fulfillment of my love. Please note that we still do not communicate this with our clients, not even with our religious ones. Let the client decide where to put what. Now I can ask my client to write his or her one-line statement, beginning with the word I, representing the first name from the middle of the star. Going clockwise from the top of the star to the right and finishing with the last issue at the left-hand side of the star. This again may take time. Sometimes it takes half an hour. Time here is a positive factor because it helps the inner dialogue of the client. The client notices his or her own struggle to get it right. In other words, the exercise calls for the client's conscience, aware conscience. Did the nouns that I choose fit into my statement? Or did I have to break up the one line and start another? So if that happened, what is it that I need to correct or exchange? He or she will ask, is this truly me, the one I see as if I was looking in the mirror, the one I see which is in the light? If the client is having still trouble getting the statement in line with the intentions to be true, we now repeat that the exercise is like a sketch of a self-portrait. What we hold dear and important fits with our spiritual being, like a smile expresses our wisdom and love. Here it is that the lead pencil and eraser come to cooperate. We are free to choose and we are responsible for our decisions. What needs to be exchanged or corrected can be exchanged, or when needed, corrected. When the client has finalized the process of retrieving the complex of values that obviously produces the existential dynamics of one's personal identity in an authentically integrated formula, the next step begins. It will start expressing our surprised mind, put into a Socratic question, flavored with authentic admiration. And here we may refer to Frankl's lecture and show that the exercise stands for a dynamic, typically human response to all kinds of situations in life. It represents the circle of how we humans solve problems or answer challenges, adding meaning and dignity. If we look at a case example, we see here the nouns of a 60-year-old female health worker called Inge, who suffered from exhaustion and despair due to her heavy load she had to carry. She didn't believe that she could go on doing what she did. So let's look at it. In the next slides, we go through it slide by slide, and you see it grow. These are the nouns my client wrote down, as you can see. And this is how she put the hierarchy in the row of her nouns. Here we see how my client Inge framed her hierarchy of values. As you can see, Inge wrote her one-line statement, her authentic, basic idea came to paper, and she was surprised. After having made sure that these values were the right ones and that this is what she meant, we finalized the statement, and Inge states, "I love to work in a garden. It is a lot of effort to see planting not being overtaken by weeds, and because of the healthy foods I harvest with joy." So I commented that. Wow, Inge, that is beautiful, isn't it? Harvesting with joy. Where did you get this from? When was it for the first time that you felt this joy? And her response was, "My grandmother allowed me to take care of my own corner in her garden. I was so proud that she left me doing this. And I was responsible for it. And I guess that's where I got it from. I really love to work in a garden. It helps to relax my mind and my heart. I really feel well then doing what needs to be done. And I can decide to put where and how to combine plants so that I do not have to use chemicals, And that's important because I like healthy foods. Are you familiar with gardening?" she asked me. "Even if in front of my quarters only plastic lawn would be available, I would still be able to admire, acknowledge, and recognize what it is that moves this person, Inge, and now start exploring how her recovery from the garden can be superimposed upon her present situation, carrying the heavy load she has to carry." We discover that the attitudinal value is leading experience and actions. Recovery begins from within, from the ever-healthy personal spiritual cause. Helping professionals work in different social systems. Their goals may differ, but they can be confident about the outcome with the psychological self-esteem of their clients. We as logotherapists intend to help procure individual sanitas, health. That is, the capacity and the energy to individually participate in reality, to bring to reality what is important. As a side effect, we see that our clients retrieve the awareness of their personal sanctity, their wholeness, uniqueness, and novelty. That's not individually or socially being very important, as many do, but it is the true sanctity of a very own unconditional personhood. That's why I changed these words, sanity on the one hand, sanctity on the other hand, in the scheme that Viktor Frankl once gave. When we work in pastoral care, we do intend retrieving the above-mentioned awareness of being sheltered in God's hand, sanctity, and as a side effect, an awareness of sanity in relating to reality that occurs, and to be reactivated in brotherhood. I would like to thank you for your invitation and for your attention. I do hope that you have found a way to understand, integrate, and explain this proposed format of Viktor Frankl's existential analysis. You may have seen where and how self-distance and self-transcendence in action have occurred in the reality of a client. You may have discovered that meaning is what occurs in process, expressing and explaining the sanity and dignity of your client in his or her relationship with his or her reality. If the one-liner was a bullseye, you will have noticed the expression of deeply positive emotion, which is preceding all true behavioral and attitudinal change. Change does not occur without emotion. Emotion is how you move forward. You may also have picked up that and how existential analysis helps people to rediscover that their spiritual identity is invulnerable, therefore sanctity, enabling them to address and heal the hurt or frustrated egos. It goes without saying that this represents the core of Frankl's work, meaning and dignity being the motivating poles of a healthy life. Last but not least, I want to thank my colleague and friend Lyndon Williams for his great service of producing this video on this project of presenting Frankl's existential analysis as a prerequisite for logotherapy, in fact, for any humane service. Thank you very much.